Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. The following story that you're going to be listening to, it was sent to me by one of our dear brother, and the message reads like this. Hello, Brother Nashi, how are you? Can you please post my own story as hidden identity? My brother, I have come here on your platform so that I can share with you the secret that was kept in our family. So as for now, I am a church-going person and I go to a Pentecostal church, and I will never turn my back on Jesus Christ, because I know that from the family where I come from, there is a lot of stuff that goes on there. And the other thing that makes me to be very strong when it comes to prayer, it is because my father, he wanted me to inherit all of his things that he was using as a traditional healer. And I made a choice and I said, this is not what I want to become. So each and every day when they say, let us pray, I try by all means to pray, and to pray very hard, because I know what I am fighting against. Currently, I am living here in South Africa, but the story that I want to share with you, it happened when the story that I want to share with you, it happened there back home in Zim. This story, it happened to my father, and the things that we saw that were very scary, and these things we saw them when my father passed away. So my father, a lot of people, they used to call him the doctor. When we were growing up, there were a lot of musicians, very popular musicians, that would come at our house. Then they would get this other charm that they call mudano. So what they mean when they say mudano, this means that when you have that charm, you are able to convince people to come. It's if you are an artist, if you are going to be holding a show, then when you use the charms, then a lot of people will find themselves coming to your show, even if they are not like your dedicated fans. So this is the charms that my father used to give a lot of these musicians. It didn't matter if these musicians were gospel musicians or if they were like your regular musicians. You know, back in those days, they used to hold a lot of galas. So whenever there was a gala that was going to be held, so whenever there was a gala that was supposed to take place, that is when we used to see a lot of very popular musicians. So our father was very special in that way. And there was this other story that happened. My father was once visited by this other member of parliament. So in that constituency in which this member of parliament was contesting, the people were rejecting him. They wanted to choose another member of parliament to represent them in their constituency. But this man, he still wanted to go to parliament. That was when he came to our house. When he came to our house, my father then made that member of parliament to sacrifice his own daughter, and he sacrificed his own daughter. That is how he ended up going to the parliament each and every election. The way that you would win the elections, you will just see that there was something that was going on, something that was spiritual, because people would be claiming that they do not like him at all, but at the end of the day, they will just end up voting for him anyway. So this man, we do not know what happened, but the charms that he had been given by my father, something went wrong. So he then called my father, and my father was supposed to go and sort out the whole mess, because his own daughter, the one that he had sacrificed, the spirit of that young girl, she was now waking up from the dead and giving this minister a lot of problems at his homestead. So my father, knowing that he was very powerful, he then went there. But when he was busy like trying to chase away the spirit of that young woman who had been sacrificed by her own father, that was when my father was said to have been bitten by a snake, like, you know, that black mamba. As he was busy sprinkling some charms trying to chase away the spirit of that young woman. That was when people saw that on his hand, suddenly there was a black mamba that had coiled itself around his right arm. Then this black mamba, it started to strike my father. And my father knew a lot of herbs, and by the time that my father got so sick, when they took him to the hospital, the doctors then said it was not possible for someone to be bitten by a black mamba. Then you go back home and then you just stay at home and you do not die. The doctor said that things do not work like that. But my father, he survived the snake bite that he got from that black mamba. By the time that I returned back home to Zim, when I looked at my father, even though I had hated him a lot because of the stories that we had had when we were still growing up, but still I just started to pray for my father because he was in such a sorry state. You could feel very sorry for him. But my father, he was a murderer. The stories that we had when we were still growing up was that my father sacrificed his own firstborn, our sister. We never knew our sister because she was sacrificed by our father, and knew our sister because she was sacrificed by our father. Then the boys that had been sent by our father to murder our sister, they tried to bury her in the mountain, but when they were busy digging up the grave, something must have happened in the mountain, because when my sister's dead body was found, she had been burnt down. The whole flesh had been burnt. It was only the bones that were remaining. And those men that had been hired by my father to murder our sister, they were nowhere to be seen, and they had only managed to dig a very shallow grave. So they just dumped my sister's dead body and they all ran away. So when my father was still alive, he was very powerful, even in the village. The village chief, he was also convinced by my father. Whatever my father wanted the village chief to do, that is what will end up happening. And my father, he was connected to people that were in higher offices of power in politics. So most of them during the election season, they would come so that they can be given some charms to convince the crowd that would come to their rallies and stuff like that. So people were even afraid to talk about that issue of my sister being murdered. They knew that my father was the one who had sacrificed his own daughter, but there was no one who was brave enough to get my father arrested. But everything that is under the sun has an expiry date. Even the charms that my father once had, they had an expiry date. He was lying on his deathbed. I was told that the ghost of my sister was seen, and she was sitting on top of this other tree. In our compound, there was this very big tree that my father never wanted anyone to touch. And when he was on his deathbed, it was said that that was when he said that the spirit of his daughter was sitting on top of the tree. So no one knew where he got the energy from, because at that time, my father had spent so many days without eating anything. So he was weak, and people knew that he was about to die. But still, my father, he managed to wake up from his deathbed, and he went and he took an axe and he started to chop down the tree alone. This was a man who had been bitten by a black mamba. This was a man who had spent so many days without eating anything. Then he started chopping that tree. The moment that he finished chopping off that tree, that was when my father passed away, and I was called and I went to Zim to bury my father. But a lot of stuff started happening when we were busy mourning for our father. For an instance, we used to see the ghost of my sister walking around the compound. I saw my sister, and the other things that were happening was that the little children that were there, they started calling out the name of my sister, even though they had never heard about her. They kept on saying that they were seeing a ghost. And when we went to the graveyard, the moment that my father's coffin was laid in his grave, and then there was an explosion in the mountain, that mountain where my sister's bones were buried, there was a big explosion, as if someone had set off a bomb in that mountain. This explosion happened. We even felt that the earth was shaking, and we then buried my father. After we had buried my father, I then returned back to South Africa. But each and every day, when I go down on my knees, I mean business. I know what I am fighting against, for I do not want to become the man that my father wanted me to become. Yes, to be powerful, to associate with these politicians coming to you whenever it is election season, so that you can give them a lot of powers, strengthening these musicians and other traditional healers. This was my father's speciality, but he had to murder his own daughter, so that I cannot do. Dear listeners, right there was a message that was sent to me by our dear brother. I am hoping that this story did not get lost in translation, but that was the narration of the story that was sent to me by our dear brother. Strange things do happen in this world.